We have to fight to protect fundamental American rights and freedoms, starting with abortion rights, and we have to deliver economic relief. And we have to really show that we're going to authentically fight on both of those.
New Hampshire, in a really resounding way, stood up for common sense, for reproductive freedom, and for democracy.
We all consistently, at every level, state-led candidates, state Senate candidates, the executive offices, we made clear that democracy was on the ballot and that fundamental rights and freedoms, including reproductive freedom, was on the ballot.
Hi again, everyone. It's 5 o'clock in New York. Simply put, the winners of Tuesday night's elections boil down to those who respond to their constituents' concerns and needs and worries best. As you just heard from a few of the Democrats who prevailed on Tuesday, voters were clear about what they wanted. They wanted representatives who will protect democracy, protect a woman's right to choose, and protect and safeguard and strengthen our economy. And for the most part, voters didn't want more of the lies and extremism being spread by the disgraced ex-president and all of his handpicked candidates. There was no shellacking, there was no thumping of the current president's record, an historic marker demonstrating that even though President Joe Biden's approval numbers might not be high by historical standards, he and his party were viewed as the better, the preferable alternative than the Republican Party, who for years now has assaulted the foundation of our country and just a few months ago gleefully celebrated when the Supreme Court took away a constitutional right to an abortion, something women in this country have had for almost 50 years. At this moment, key races in the U.S. Senate and the U.S. House have still not been called, and it is not clear who will control the chambers. Those outstanding races will determine which party does. But what we know for sure is that forecasted red wave you heard about other places, not here, and all the election denialism that went with it did not come and will not come. Tom Friedman writes this, quote, Tuesday's election really was the most important test since the Civil War of whether the engine of our constitutional system, our ability to peacefully and legitimately transfer power, remains intact. And it looks to have come through a little dinged up, but okay. A very fired up President Joe Biden spoke this afternoon about the strength of our democracy.
You believed in the system. You believed in the institutions. You fought like hell for it. And that's the most important thing that happened, in my view, in this election. It was the first national election since January 6th, and there were a lot of concerns about whether democracy would meet the test. It did. It did. It did.
It's been a long time since democracy has been that big of an applause line. I think that's good for all of us. It's where we start the hour with White House Chief of Staff Ron Klain. How are you doing? How are you feeling? And just take me inside what is even a good day, a stressful place to work, the West Wing.
Yeah, thanks, Nicole. Thanks for having me. Look, obviously you've been through this. Election days are very, very stressful days. I will say we went into it feeling much better than the punditry predicted. We knew the president had delivered for the American people on the economy, on COVID, on infrastructure, on jobs, on protecting reproductive freedoms, on speaking out for democracy. And we believed in what the president had said and delivered. But obviously, we're gratified by the results the election produced. As you say, votes are still being counted in Arizona, Nevada. We're going to have a runoff in Georgia. A lot of places in California aren't resolved. But we know already that the president has produced the strongest result for his party in a first midterm of any president, a Democratic president in 60 years. We know he's produced maybe the first president since FDR to get every one of his Senate incumbents reelected. Strongest result for the governors in 40 years. So we had a very, very good election by the president standing up for what he believes in, progress on the economy, abortion rights, and democracy, and the voters responded.
Ron, we've talked a lot about how the Biden economy is like the Rodney Dangerfield economy. It doesn't get the respect it deserves because the inflation story obscures it. I think you could sort of extend that tortured description to the administration, that in a lot of instances, and I think Tuesday bears this out, the president's agenda doesn't get the respect it deserves. The truth is a lot of the Democrats who pulled out wins in the House ran on the infrastructure bill. They ran on the president's agenda. Does he feel, I mean, I won't fill in the blank, but how does he feel about that?
Well, I think he feels very gratified about it, Nicole. I agree. I think that, what we've done since we've been here is we've governed. We've passed some bills with only Democrats. We've passed bills on a bipartisan basis whenever that's possible. The infrastructure bill, the CHIPS bill, the veterans bills. And what I found really interesting, Nicole, is when the president made those congratulatory calls on Tuesday night, one by one, members who were reelected just volunteered up to the president. You know, Mr. President, I ran on your infrastructure bill. It gave me something to sell to the voters. Oh, I ran on the CHIPS bill, talked about our high-tech manufacturing future. Oh, Mr. President, I ran on all the progress we've made on COVID. And, you know, it's interesting, Nicole, we overperformed in those frontline incumbent districts. The people where you think a party in power would lose, those incumbents won. The Republican pickups mostly came in open seats where we didn't have an incumbent to run on the president's record. But those people who are usually vulnerable in midterm, new incumbents, frontline incumbents, they did exceptionally well because they had something to talk about. Let me tell you something. I think one other thing the punditry missed, I think the biggest thing the punditry missed, I think they underestimated the American people. Yeah, the polls showed the American people are frustrated with inflation. We're frustrated with inflation. What they looked at was a president who was working hard to deliver and a Republican Party that had no answers, only criticisms. And I think that was the choice that was before the voters. And I think that's one reason why so many Democrats won.
You and I have a lot of things in common, having spent our careers in politics over the same sort of chapters in American political history. But I worked for a president of two whose midterm story defied the historical trend. And I always felt like this year had this gut thing in common with 2002, in that the Capitol was attacked. And whether the insurrection was a voting issue or not, you had this gut thing that, like, well, one party wants to get to the bottom of it and make sure it never happens again, and the other party wants to call it a tourist visit. How in the end, and the president's really been out there on democracy, how in the end was that, was that the floor, and then the policy debates about the economy and choice happened on that? I mean, how important was it in your view and in hindsight for the president to really come back to the themes of his inaugural address about democracy?
Look, Nicole, I think it was very important to the president personally, important to everything he believed in. As you know, he launched his campaign on the idea that his candidacy was a battle for the soul of America. And at the time, people kind of said, that's crazy. You should talk about the economy more or whatever. And he said, no, this is what I believe in. This is what I think is the fundamental underlying underpinning of it. And, he got elected on that. We saw January 6th. He spoke out about that. And in the last week of the campaign, one of his big closing speeches was about democracy. And people said, oh, that's not smart politically. And the president, I think his compass on this has been absolutely right all along. Democracy is the fundamental thing that everything else is based on. We can debate economic policy. People can agree or disagree with Joe Biden on the economy. They can agree or disagree with our climate change policy. But if we don't have a democracy, all those disagreements are irrelevant and swept aside. So this was something that was bedrock for Joe Biden. He wanted to put it before the voters. He wanted to put it directly to them. And I think the results you're seeing, not just in these congressional races, but all these Secretary of State races where election deniers are losing, down ballot races where the down ballot candidates are outperforming the up ballot candidates, show you that the president was right. Voters want to protect our democracy.
Does the president look forward to not, and I told you so, I know enough to know that's not who he is, but does he look forward to, or is he optimistic that there'll be any reset, that McConnell may kind of act like McConnell again and not like Ted Cruz? I mean, what are his expectations of the Republicans now?
Well, look, as he said the other day, he has, since he got here, tried to govern in a bipartisan way, and he's prepared to do that, no matter what the final counts show about the number of Democrats and Republicans in the House and Senate. And I think, Nicole, the question's really going to go to the Republicans. Are they prepared to be governing partners? Are they prepared to work on the fundamentals, funding our government, keeping our economy moving ahead, helping to fight COVID? All these things are just the basic fundamentals that should cross party lines, that we should deliver on. Things like mental health. The president mentioned this yesterday. That isn't a political issue. Fighting cancer. These things where we have strong initiatives. And I hope the Republicans will join us and help us make progress on those things. This should be a time where we find common ground. Now, the president also made quite clear, I don't want to be naive about this, that he is drawing the line. He's not going to let the Republicans cut Social Security. He's not going to let them cut Medicare. Certainly not going to let them pass an abortion ban. But on areas where we can find common ground, that's what we'll be looking for. And that's what he's looked for from day one. And that's certainly not going to change. We're going to try to do even more of it in the next 2 years.